Good afternoon. My name is Cantor Alan Brava, and I am the Executive Director of the Free Synagogue of Flushing, a historic 104-year-old synagogue right here in the middle of what is now Chinatown. When you walked up the stairs of our sanctuary, way above, and maybe when you go home, look, there's a quote from Isaiah that says that this house should be a house for all people. And I was thinking about it today because we very often throw that line out and we say it's kind of like indiscriminately. But when I was thinking about our house should be a house for all people, shouldn't our house be expanded beyond this premise? Shouldn't our house be our community? And shouldn't our community be our country? And shouldn't our country be one of all the countries in the world where everyone says, my house is a house for all people? Now, I'm not exactly sure what Isaiah was thinking when he said that, but now it's a couple thousand years later, and I know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking there could not have been a better choice to have this gathering today than at the Free Synagogue of Flushing. In 1917, 5 women decided to create what is now this synagogue because they saw the need and the influx of Jewish families coming into this neighborhood. But one of the things that this synagogue is known for is its ability to deal with diversity without using the word deal. It just is. You come to the Free Synagogue, you're Jewish, intermarried, maybe you're black, maybe you're Asian, maybe we don't know what you are because we don't care. We don't care. Everyone's welcome at the Free Synagogue of Flushing. So to have a program today where we're welcoming our neighbors, our Asian neighbors, into our home, to me, there could not have been a better venue than the Free Synagogue of Flushing. So there is one verse from a psalm. We all, regardless of our religions, know about the book of Psalms. There's one verse from Psalm 133. And the verse says, Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. How pleasant, how beautiful it is when brothers and sisters can gather and be together. Now, I don't expect everybody here to know the words, but this is what it would sound like if you came to our synagogue on the Sabbath, which each and every one of you now is invited to do when we finally reopen. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. If you don't know the words, maybe we can hum it. La 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 la. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. So on behalf of the Board of Trustees and our President, Ian Benson, who is with us tonight, we welcome you to our home. We would like our home to be your home from this moment on. I'm pleased, we're honored, we're thrilled to be working with the Queens Jewish Community Council, with Michael Nussbaum, the president, with Mayor Waxman, the executive director, with the JCRC, with Avi from Stand With Us. I wanted to mock and say stand with me, but I'll take the sign anyhow, stand with us. And of course the mayor's office, who enabled through grants these programs to help cope with the hate of people that just might be a little bit different than everybody else. So it is now my honor and my pleasure to introduce the president of the Queens Jewish Community Council, Michael Nussbaum.
Thank you, Cantor Brava. What a magnificent place that's right in the middle of an Asian community. And many people that you talk to in this community, they go by this building, and many people don't recognize what's inside the gates. And unfortunately, we live in a society that we have to have those gates. But I want to thank Cantor and the president of the synagogue for allowing us to come here today. I am the president and grateful to be of the Queens Jewish Community Council, but I like to think that I'm also a citizen of Queens and a person, and I've been around a long, long time in this city and very active, that recognizes the need to begin having conversations like we're having today. And we ask the question that this is a discussion between the Asian community and the Jewish community. We will also have discussions between our community and the South Asian community, and the Muslim community, and the Latino community, and the African American community. It's not just one community that necessarily has the affliction of being targeted for a hate crime. And we ask the question today that hopefully we'll have the answers. We know how and the need to understand, to respond to the one thing that victims say: why me? Why us? Why does someone in the city of New York, if they wear a black hat and they're Orthodox in Williamsburg, let's say, is a symbol of an attack? Or an Asian American, whether it be a Korean American or a Chinese American or a Filipino or a South Asian that has a turban on, that somebody mistakes that person for possibly a Muslim or someone else? Why is it that certain people that are identified by their religion outwardly or their race outwardly? I could walk down the street if I didn't have a yarmulke on. No one would know what I was, where I'm from. I'm lucky. Many people are not that lucky. Many people, unfortunately, project an image because of the clothes they wear, or their facial expression, or what they wear on their head, or over their face. That becomes a target for hateful people. It's a target that is so easily identified, and it's rapidly increasing. There is not one community that suffers more than the other. It goes in sort of cycles. You know, for thousands and thousands of years, the Jewish community has always been persecuted because not just their religion, but sometimes the way they communicate amongst themselves in what we used to call a shtetl, a little community. And I always say, we all live in those type of communities. We're all choose to isolate ourselves because we're comfortable in that community. Whether you're in Flushing, or whether you're in Astoria, when the Greeks were there, or whether you're in Corona when the Italians were there, or whether you were in Forest Hills that's now populated by Bukharian Jews, or you're in a Korean community. We'd like to be within a community that we could shop, the kids go to school, and we have housing that makes it very comfortable. But we're targeted by people because they identify us, and it's very easily to identify us by coming into those, quote, communities. Queens is always called the most diverse county in the United States. I counter that by saying we are diverse within our own little communities. When we walk outside those communities, we become part of the whole, and we are attacked at that time. And that's unfortunate what we're doing today. And what we're doing today is not just having people discuss. We want to learn, we want to answer questions, and we have people that hopefully will bring that information. The first person that I like to introduce, many of the people in this room know. She represents this community. She's an old friend, much, much younger than me, but an old friend in terms of the years that I've known her in this community and in Queens. And she has risen to a stature of authority, not just here in Queens, but in Washington, D.C. So when she asks for a piece of legislation to deal with hate crimes, and Congresswoman, I know you'll talk about it, it came quickly. And I've seen legislation, both in Washington, Albany, and New York. It takes a long time to gather a consensus to deal with an issue such as this, a hate crime. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, is Congresswoman Grace Meng.
Michael meant old in the traditional sense of the word, but that's okay, I'm older than I look. I am so incredibly grateful to all of you for being here today, for taking time out of your busy schedules to discuss this important issue, and more importantly, to brainstorm and to think about ways that we can go forward and to help all of our communities heal. Thank you so much to QJCC and your whole team, Michael Nussbaum, who I've known since I was a kid. I know that every time something happens, he reaches out and he makes sure that our communities are not just expressing condolences verbally, but thinking about ways, constructive ways to help our communities heal. Thank you so much to the Free Synagogue of Flushing, to Cantor Brava, to Stand With Us, one of my favorite organizations. Avi, thank you for all that you do, your important work. I don't have to tell all of you here today that hate and division are on the rise. And two of the principal target communities are Asian Americans and Jewish Americans. These attacks have included deadly assaults against Asian American, especially women, in New York State, resulting in tragic deaths of fellow Queenswoman Gui-ying Ma and Michelle Go, the woman who was pushed to her death in Times Square. In the Jewish community, there have also been numerous street assaults in New York, particularly in heavily Orthodox neighborhoods. We pray for the quick recovery of the Jewish men in Lakewood who were just violently attacked a few weeks ago. And if these were standalone incidents, they would be worrisome enough, but they are not. Statistics confirm that Asian Americans and Jewish Americans are increasingly under attack. According to a recent FBI report, Jews are the most targeted group for religious-based hate crimes in the country. In 2020, approximately 60% of religious-based hate crimes in the US targeted Jews, even as Jews constitute 2% of the US population. And in that same year, 43% of all hate crimes that took place nationally targeted Asian Americans. And it's even more disappointing that of the 524 hate crimes recorded in New York City last year, 2/3 of them targeted the Asian American and Jewish communities. And our communities have a long history in this country of standing up for one another and for the tenets of American pluralism, fighting against defamation, ending discrimination in immigration policy, advancing civil rights protections, and overcoming a range of barriers to full participation in our country's life. And it's no wonder that in these dark times, our communities have come together to support one another and to combat hate. I know I say this a lot, but I can never express it enough, but I'm incredibly grateful to our Jewish community leaders for the support that they have provided and continue to provide, especially during the last 2 years, for our Asian American community. And it's events like this, like tonight's, that proves our community's resilience. I'm proud to serve as one of the co-chairs of our House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, because I'm committed to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to find solutions to address the dramatic increase in violence and harassment plaguing the Jewish community. Our Jewish neighbors and friends deserve to feel safe. I can't tell you how grateful I am also. Michael mentioned our Hate Crimes Act that was signed into law almost a year ago. I will say that throughout the last 2 years, some of the earliest, most vocal supporters locally in New York, in Congress with my colleagues, and across the nation have been leaders and members of the Jewish community. When a lot of these incidents were starting to happen, It was one of the leaders from a national Jewish community that said to me, someone has to be keeping track of this. Someone has to be recording the data and the statistics. And that helped us to craft this now law because we basically realized, or maybe I was late to the game, that the federal government does not really collect statistics and data of all the hate crimes and bias incidents that are happening across the country. And just like with any sort of public health crisis, which this is, in order to fix something, you have to be able to measure it. And so the Hate Crimes Act has largely been billed as something that is to help the Asian American community, but it's actually a piece of legislation that will, as it's implemented, help every single community combat discrimination. This bill, I mentioned, would improve the hate crimes reporting by creating that infrastructure to report. Most law enforcement jurisdictions across the country reported 0 hate crimes last year. They don't have to report it. In some jurisdictions, they actually said the bias incidents went down, which we all know, even anecdotally, is not true. And in, I think, 71 of the cities that have a population of over 100,000 people, they reported 0 hate crimes and bias incidents. So this just goes to show you that our data collection, it's not accurate and it's not complete. It would also create state hate crime hotlines and allow educational classes directly related to the communities harmed by these offenses. We also want to make sure that our law enforcement agencies are accurately and thoroughly investigating these incidents. I'll give you an example of a case that happened early on in the pandemic right here in Flushing, a few blocks away, where an Asian American woman was pushed down by someone in front of a Flushing bakery, and this guy shouted all these ethnic slurs towards her. But there were no witnesses that were willing to come forward. And in typical times, the DA and the law enforcement would probably say, okay, no hate crime, there's no evidence, no witnesses. Our DA, Melinda Katz, her team actually took further steps, and they subpoenaed the email or text message, phone records of the attacker, and saw that his content was full of discriminatory language, and therefore it was charged as a hate crime. So part of this is to aid our law enforcement agencies to take these types of incidents, whether it's just a bias incident or a hate crime, but to take them seriously. It's important to support our nonprofit organizations as well, who are often, just like QJCC and Stand With Us, to give them the funding, I know you like that, give them the funding and the resources to be able to do programs like this and to reach out to more people. I also want to highlight my friend Karen Lin, who's an attorney with the Asian American Bar Association of New York. They put out the first pamphlet brochure about the statistics and how to begin combating anti-Asian hate in the early days of the pandemic. Something that we've also worked on locally is nonprofit security grants, which have helped so many in our community, in my congressional district, fortify and protect our houses of worship like this one, community centers, and day schools. We have worked tirelessly, and I have to give Senator Chuck Schumer a shout out too, because you never know when Chuck might show up, right? He could be in the back. But to help secure a record-breaking $250 million for the nonprofit security grants for this year. And I also want to give kudos to Jewish American leaders who are not only helping their own congregants and houses of worship apply for these grants, but groups like JCRC have been reaching out to help folks from other religions and other nonprofits to apply for these grants as well. And so I want to say a special thank you to the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force. for being here today, but also for the great work that they do, because this is not happening in most jurisdictions across the United States. But we know that there is so much work to be done to ensure that everyone in our community can access the services provided by the task force. And this means ensuring language access. Whether we're talking about the Asian American community, whether we're talking about the Bukharian community, we need to make sure that our victims are able to communicate with law enforcement as well. And so we have to remember that the problem of hate crimes is multifaceted, and it's going to require a multifaceted solution. There is not one slogan, not one answer, not one bill that is going to solve the entire problem. And I say this often in audiences of Asian Americans and beyond, which means that there's always someone upset and impatient because more work does need to be done. One of the issues that we've also worked on is to further education to promote understanding. We know that, and I want to give kudos to, I think it was Congresswoman Maloney, who a few years ago passed legislation to promote the teaching of the Holocaust in our schools. We cannot assume that every child and every person in the United States even knows or understands the Holocaust. And just as the same with Asian American history in this country, we must make sure that we are teaching a full history, complete teaching of our American history to our kids. For too long, I was born and raised here in Queens, but virtually every month, every few weeks, I'm still asked where I learned to speak English. I'm often asked where I'm from, and they never seem satisfied with the answer of Queens, New York. They want to know where I'm really from. Actually, a few months ago, my children experienced this first experience of sort of racism when a guy walked by and pretended to speak in Chinese, you know, the traditional sounds that someone might make thinking it sounds like Chinese language. And my kids, who are still learning Chinese, I was very angry and I didn't know how to react in front of my boys. And then one of them turns to me and he says, "Mom, he knows how to speak Chinese." I said, "No, we have a lot of work to do, even within our own family." But I forget why I digress. I'm very excited to be here with all of you. But education is important. For too many people, they may look at someone that looks like me and think that I am a foreigner, that I am not really from this country. And it's important that we're teaching diverse history to our students because we want people to know that Asian Americans are just as American as anyone else, that Jewish Americans are just as American as anyone else. And one of the things I will say, and I'll end with this, one of the hardest things, but the most important and rewarding things about this moment in history is that we have this opportunity to bridge intergenerational gaps. Our parents and our grandparents, who were the first ones to come to this country, don't necessarily have the tools, the language abilities, and the resources to be able to work across different coalitions. And so it really falls on the shoulders of people like me, that first or second generation of immigrants who was raised and educated here, to be able to expand on opportunities like this. Events like this is where we will bear real fruits. This is where we will come together and strategize in the long term to truly combat hate and to help our communities promote more understanding of each other. So I'm really grateful to be part of today's event. I just got readers during COVID. I don't even know what to do with these half the time. But it's just really important that we continue to have events like this. I want to support QJCC in more events like this, and really kudos to the whole team for promoting events like this. I'm really proud to be here and look forward to continuing our work together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I forgot, and I apologize, not starting out by saying shalom.
Ni hao, annyeonghaseyo. Those are the dominant languages that probably in this building right now, Korean, Chinese, and Hebrew. We're not alone, the QJCC and others doing this. We have partners, and I want to introduce a partner that helped put this together, and that's the Jewish Community Relations Council. I'm fortunate to be a member of that as well, and I think we have here, is Ben Golubin? Ben? Okay. But I want to introduce Rabbi Robert Kaplan, who is the senior member, and Rabbi Kaplan helped put together the funding with the city of this program. Bob?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Congressperson, for being here and being such an important voice against hate, because that's really where it's at. For some reason, hate has become acceptable again. Well, it's not just for some reason. It's because some folks think they can use hate as a way of driving various different kinds of things in society. Whether it's a political career or it's another kinds of issue, hate has become a tool that has become acceptable again. So what is our responsibility? And I'm here wearing several hats. As Michael mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm also commissioner of human rights for the city of New York. And I'm also in the funding comes from something called the PATH. The PATH is Partners Against the Hate. It's out of the mayor's office on hate crimes prevention. And JCRC is the Jewish PATH partner. There is a PATH partner in the Asian community, Asian American Federation. There is one in the LGBTQ community. There's one in the African American community, the Latino community, and the Muslim community of New York. And we need so many other partners, because what we need in New York is leaders who are strong and proud and consistent and persistent. To quote my dear friend, Congressperson Meeks, you got to be consistent and persistent in saying that hate is simply unacceptable. And I'm so glad that the Hate Crimes Task Force and the new inspectors here, however, you're not going to incarcerate or prosecute hate out of society. It's part of the puzzle. You're not going to just legislate it out of society. It's part of the puzzle. What you're going to do is lead us out of it. We just celebrated in the Jewish community Passover. And what was Moses' great feat? Well, he helped, with God's help, of course, with God's outstretched arm, to lead the people out of bondage. And that's really what our purpose is here today. Not just as Jews or Asian or Pacific Islanders or as representing any group in America that has now become the target of hate. And hate has always been with us, and I have a neat suspicion it will always be with us. But our job is to ensure as leaders that it is always unacceptable and not seen as a pathway to something else. So we have to sort of push it back under the rock. We have to make sure that we are always out there. When something happens against community Y, that community X and all the other letters of the alphabet are out there. When it's happening to the Asian American community, that the Jewish community is there and vice versa. When it's happening to the Muslim community, that everyone else is out there. And we're saying with loud and proud voices that hate is unacceptable. However, one of the answers that we do have, and part of the puzzle again, there's the chair of the Morton Deutsch Center of Conflict Resolution at Columbia University. His name is Peter Coleman. And he recently wrote a book called Toxic Polarity, The Way Out. And what Peter talks about, and I've had him talk for us a number of times because his message is so powerful, that this has been a 50-year trend in American society. This just didn't crop up out of nowhere. It's just some folks that sort of gave it a little bit extra oomph, and certainly COVID didn't hurt as well. And he said, well, we have this 50-year trend of polarity, of toxic polarity in our society, so what's one of the ways out? And it's what's happening here tonight, folks. And to quote Cantor Brava before with the Hanei Matov, behold how good it is, the word that he uses, proximity. We need more proximity. We need to be with each other. We need to understand each other, and we need to lend dignity to one another. When we hear the narrative of the other that may be a little bit different than our narrative and speak a different political language or a different cultural language or a different faith language, we need to lend it absolute dignity. And the only way we're going to do that is by lending dignity to ourselves and then become partners in creating a world that's built on this acceptance and this dignity. So we are proud to be here. I was at a couple events earlier today. We recently, again, with the mayor's office, started the We Are All Brooklyn Fellowship Against the Hate. It is 18 leaders learning how to fight hate together. God willing, the funding comes through, and we're going to bring it to Queens. We're going to bring it to the Bronx. We're going to bring it to other parts of the city, because only by being proximate, only being understanding, behold. I'm sorry, I'm stealing your line, but we took it out of the Bible in any event. Behold, how really phenomenal and great it is when we work together, when we see the world through a common lens together, and lend dignity to the lens of everyone we encounter, rather than hate to everyone we encounter. Thank you to all the organizers. Thank you to the congressperson, and thank you for all being here. Now go out and be those leaders that say this is simply unacceptable. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mayor Waxman. I'm the Executive Director of the Queens Jewish Community Council, QJCC. And for the last 5 years, I oversaw the senior centers at Self-Help, many of which have a majority Chinese and or Asian participants, like the center right up Casino Boulevard. So I've proudly been coordinating events with and for Asian Americans for years. I'm glad to continue to do so. I can point out there's clearly a deep connection between the American Jewish community and the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. We know this because in 6 days, with the start of May, we'll begin to celebrate Jewish American Heritage Month while concurrently celebrating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. How much closer could we get? An event like tonight's has its clear positives. It's empowering, it's educational, it's about communities banding together, and it highlights the government support there is against hate. Support from our mayor, from our Congress members, from the Queens DA's office, and support from NYPD, just to name a few. However, an event like tonight is also a stark reminder that the reason there's so much support against hate is the despicable fact that there is so much hate out there that we need to unite and rally against. I'm guessing few among you have heard of Martin Niemöller. Father Niemöller was a prominent Lutheran pastor in Germany at the turn of the 20th century. According to the United States Holocaust Museum, Niemöller enthusiastically welcomed the Third Reich. But a turning point in Niemöller's political sympathies came with a January 1934 meeting between Niemöller, Adolf Hitler, and two prominent Protestant bishops to discuss state pressures on churches. At this meeting, it became clear that Niemöller's phone had been tapped by the Gestapo, the German secret police. It was also clear that the Pastors' Emergency League, the PEL, which Niemöller had helped found, was under close state surveillance. Following the meeting, Niemöller would come to see the Nazi state as a dictatorship. He emerged as an outspoken public foe of Hitler. Niemöller spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps. While his name might not be familiar, perhaps some here are familiar with his poignant words, which are printed on the walls of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They say, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Elie Wiesel was an author, a professor, a political activist, and a Holocaust survivor. In 1986, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and was described as a messenger to mankind. At his acceptance, he gave a stirring and renowned address in which he declared, "Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must at that moment become the center of the universe." He further averred that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. By your attending tonight's event, you're showing that you're not indifferent. You are here because you are willing to interfere. And we need to know how to do so safely, legally, and effectively. The Queens Jewish Community Council sincerely thanks Mayor Eric Adams and the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, OPHC. We're grateful for OPHC's Partner Against the Hate Path Forward funding. We thank the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York for letting us be a part of Path Forward programming by sponsoring this event. QJCC is grateful for New York legislators who continue to work with us on important issues, but we particularly thank the legislators who are part of the AAPI community, who have guided us in this event, Congresswoman Grace Meng, as well as Council members Linda Lee and Sandra Ung. QJC has had initial talks with such AAPI umbrella organizations as the Asian American Federation and Korean Community Services, and we are aware that more coordination is in order. QJCC has partnered in this event with Stand With Us, an international nonpartisan Israel education organization started in 2001 that challenges misinformation and fights anti-Semitism. Regional Director Avi Posnick will soon give details, and I'll pass the mic over shortly. Allow me just two more relevant points from Professor Wiesel. He notes that there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. He further said that one person of integrity can make a difference, to which I add, that person can be you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. As was said, my name is Avi Posnick, and I'm the Northeast Director for Stand With Us. Stand With Us is an international education organization that educates and empowers students and communities to fight anti-Semitism and hate. And I want to just begin very briefly by, first of all, thanking Congresswoman Meng, not just for being here, but for your leadership, your friendship, and your partnership, not just on this issue, but on many, many issues. So thank you very much. At Stand With Us, we have especially been helping students and who are really the leaders of tomorrow, to build alliances and bridges on college campuses and in high schools to support each other to fight hate. We have an online reporting tool that allows people to report what has occurred, and people standing by ready to provide them with the resources and connect them with what they need, whether it's legal help, whether it's connecting them with law enforcement, and much more. We encourage everyone to always report instances of anti-Semitism, bias, and hate so that it can be properly documented and addressed. As was noted, hate crimes in New York City are at an all-time high. People, especially in our communities, the Jewish community, the AAPI community, have been targeted for who they are. One of the people who was targeted within the Jewish community is someone by the name of Joey Borgen. Last year, in May 2021, Joey, a proud New Yorker, was walking through Times Square and was brutally assaulted for being Jewish. While being attacked on the street, his attackers yelled a number of anti-Semitic slurs, and when one of them was arrested, he said that he would proudly do it again. Since that attack, Joey has been speaking out about not just what has happened, but has been working to make positive changes and help not just the Jewish community, but all communities who might be targeted. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Joey Borgen to say a few words.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Couldn't have said it better myself. I just wanted to begin. I'm not going to thank anyone individually because I know I'll forget people. So just anyone that came out to support us, all the politicians, organizations, representation of law enforcement, everyone that came out to support this event. It really means a lot. So I grew up in New York my entire life. I've been a proud Jew my entire life, proud New Yorker, as was alluded to, and. Never in my entire life prior to last year did I really think that being Jewish or, representing my religion in any way would cause me to be attacked, would cause me to be targeted by anyone, whether it be a physical, verbal attack. Thankfully, I would go by the cliche. It can happen anywhere, it can happen to anyone, but, it didn't happen to me. And last year, I was, after work, working from home remotely, I wanted to attend a rally with my friends, took the subway, was walking to a rally. I was wearing my head covering, my kippah, my yarmulke. And a couple blocks away from the rally, I was, before I could even react, I saw someone chasing me from behind. I saw a few guys, proceed to, join him. And before I could even turn my head, I was being assaulted and physically pummeled to the ground. I just grabbed my head, my neck, my face, just held on for dear life. And as was said, I was assaulted, I was kicked, punched. They hit me with weapons. They pepper spray and maced me. And yet, it was all caught on video. So what really happened in the wake of all that was, the support I had from everyone, and the ability to come out and speak. Leading up to that event, I had a coworker of mine this really hit home actually when I got the opportunity to speak at this event, because one of the things I spoke about after my attack was, hate on all levels, hate on all communities, minorities, ethnicity, gender, whatever you believe in is just unacceptable. No one should be afraid to leave their house, looking over their shoulder. I've lived in the city for the past 10 years. I grew up in Long Island. And prior to that experience, I was just, walking straight, never looking back. Ever since then, it's been a little tougher, obviously, but, that shouldn't be the experience for anyone. And one of the things that really stood out to me when, my event happened was one of my coworkers was an Asian American female. And she would tell me, when, passing, she was afraid to ride the subway at night, and this is going back a year. And I would say that's terrible, and I didn't really understand it, because, obviously people say things and, you don't really experience it, but then when I saw firsthand, the amount of hate that not only upon me, but everyone, myself, all communities, it really resonated, and that was something that stood out to me when I was going, all the media contacted me, there was a video of my attack, and it went viral, so everything kind of just came as a whirlwind, and I've really been trying ever since. And it's hard because you do everything you can. You speak to people day and night, left and right, and it's really, really hard to make changes. So when we have someone like a congresswoman in our presence that is working on our behalf, and we see the representation of NYPD, and I could attest, when my attack happened, the NYPD was there within a minute or two, dispersed the scene, made sure I was okay, got me to the hospital, and when I was in the hospital, before I could even open my eyes to speak, to see anyone, the highest levels of the hate crime unit were there trying to, and that night they even caught one guy that night. And so it really is, the NYPD is really our friends, and they're working on our behalf, and we really need to work with. I've been trying, one of my goals was really to change the hate crime statutes, and hearing from our congresswoman that is taking place behind the scenes really, really is an encouraging sign, because I've been hit with so many disappointments over the past year of trying to make changes. So we really need to just bring awareness to the issue, be public with it, stand behind our politicians, and learn from it. And just it shouldn't happen to anyone, let alone it shouldn't happen to anyone. No one should be afraid to leave their houses. No one should be afraid to wear their head coverings, wear their turbans, whatever they're wearing, no matter what it is. It's not acceptable, especially like a place here in New York. So that's kind of just my message. And with organizations like Stand With Us and everyone here, it's really just a great sign that hopefully we can make some positive change and bring more awareness to this issue. Thank you, guys.
All the way from Brooklyn, I'd like to ask Noel if you could say a few words. Tell us what happened to you. Noel Quintana.
Hi, good evening. My name is Noel Quintana, and I'm being a victim of a heinous crime at the subway. It was on February 3rd of 2021 when I was going to work, and I boarded the L train, and because the train is full, so I stood by the door, and when the train stopped at Jefferson Street, there is a man who boarded the train and stood by my side. In a little while, he kicked my bag, so I was afraid and moved. He kept on kicking my bag, so I moved toward the center of the aisle. And when the train stopped at First Avenue, he came forward and slashed my face. I didn't feel anything about it because it was so quick. But when I saw the other people shocked and pointing on my face, I realized that I was slashed, and I saw a box cutter on his hand. Probably he was really, it was probably in his pocket, ready to strike anybody. And it just so happened that it happened to me. And the mayor then was so downplaying the incident, and he said that the crime in the subway is so slow, and that's the reason why I came out today, to tell the people that the subway was not safe, and to warn them and be careful when they go to the subways. And I thought I was going to die at that time, and I was worried because I was praying that I would have a happy death, and the Lord is giving me this kind of incident. And I realized that probably there is a mission that I have to take. And that's the reason why I'm here today, to tell my story and to encourage everyone, especially those who have been victimized, to speak up so that the government would have to do something about us and to stop this hate crime. I have here, I support this kind of symposium because it gives us awareness and educations of what was happening to our city. And aside from the subway, now the streets of New York is getting violently in terms of crimes. And for me, this is not acceptable, especially we, the taxpayers, and the paying riders of subway should at least have a basic service coming from them, which is safety. And I demand that the city addresses the mental health issue because they're always excusing themselves that these perpetrators have mental issues. So the city should deal with mentally challenged individuals, especially those who have committed crimes already. These individuals should not be left freely on the streets, endangering the general public. Police visibility should be everywhere and not just in tourist destinations, because most of the police have been placed on the tourist belts where they protect the tourists themselves, and yet because they want to generate more money to the city, and yet we as taxpayers also generate income to the city, and we should be protected and not at the expense of revenues. Police also, people convicted of crimes should not be paroled without rehabilitation, especially those who have committed repeated crimes. And victims of crimes in the city should be compensated for the trauma they have suffered We are the paying riders of the MTA and the taxpayers. So at least the basic service of safety should be awarded to us. And for the community, I support this kind of symposium, seminars, dialogues, so that we would be educated. And those of you who can still join for community gatherings, let us do it so that we could support one another, and in numbers, we have strength. Thank you very much, and have a good day. Thank you.
And if we could also just hear from Eun Hee Chang, and you have an interpreter also. Thank you very much.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
예, 저는 장은희라고 합니다. 근데 제가 3월 네. 3월 10일 날 시티뱅크에서
On March 3rd last year, in front of Citibank,
어떤 남자가 제 카드를 뺏어 가지고 가서 한 1,000브러치 빅토리아나 타겟 이런 데서 물건을 사고
there was a man who stole $1,000 from me from the bank and spent it at Target and Victoria's Secret.
그리고 500불 이상을 인출을 해가는 사건이 있었습니다. 그래서 제가 카드를 다시 만들어 가지고 가방 속에 넣어서
So I made a new card and I put it in my bag.
네, 제가 저 엑스트림 케어에 다니는데
I attend a care facility currently.
예, 한 군데만 다녔으면 되는데 프리미어에서 좀 도와달라 그래서 이제 프리미어 홈케어 회사를 입사를 해서 일하다 보니까 빨래가 많아졌어요.
And while working there, I just there was a lot of laundry that accumulated.
그래서 제가 빨래를 이제 이렇게 하러 가는데 그때가 8시 40분경에 그 루이스 피자리아 가게를 지나가고 있었어요.
At 8:40, I was going to do my laundry in front of Louis' Pizzeria.
그런데 제가 한 4번 그 이렇게 무리를 지어서 이렇게 다니는 분들을 본 적이 있는데.
And about 4 times there were a group of people that I ran into.
예, 그 아줌마 한 분이 그 아기를 안고 또 한 분은 흑인 한 명 그리고 젊은 소년.
One of them was actually a lady with a baby, and one man and another older lady.
그리고 키 큰 남자 두 명이 6명이서 이렇게 몰려다녔었어요.
And 2 very tall men, so 6 total. It was actually.
예, 제가 근데 최근에 한 4번을 마주쳤어요. 빨래하러 가다가.
And each time I went to the laundry, it was 4 times that I've seen them around.
예, 근데 3월 26일 날 그 젊은 소년이 제 가방을 가지고 도망가는 거예요.
On March 26th, one of them took my bag and started to run away.
그래서 제가 쫓아갔죠.
So I chased her.
그런데 갑자기 흑인이 막 뛰어오더니 제 잠바를 잡고 확 밀쳐가지고 제가 넘어졌어요.
All of a sudden, one of the other gentlemen who was with them grabbed me by my back and then pulled me to the ground.
예, 그리고 그 젊은 소년이 다시 와가지고 가방을 들고 서 있더라고요. 그래서 제가 백을 좀 달라 그랬죠. 그 백을 버리거나 백을 좀 달라 그랬더니 안 줘서 제가 그분들이 여러 명이라는 걸 알고 저기 피자리아 그 아저씨 두 분이 나와 계시길래 좀 말씀을 드렸죠. 도와달라고.
I asked them to return my bag, and seeing that they didn't do anything, I noticed the pizzeria was there, so I asked the pizzeria owner to help me.
그랬더니 그 아저씨가 저 사람 지금 못된 짓 하고 갔다고 그러면서 두 분이 와서 그 범인 두 명하고 막 싸우는 거예요. 그래서
So the pizzeria owner actually said, "I'm pretty sure they're up to no good," and then all of a sudden a huge fight broke out between that group and the pizzeria owner and one of the associates.
근데 그 칼 소리가 챙강챙강 칼 소리가 오래 났어요. 그래서 제가 도망갈 수가 없었어요.
And it happened to be a knife fight, and I could just hear the knives flying all over the place, and so I was stuck. I couldn't move. I just couldn't go anywhere.
그래서 제가 좀 소리를 내면서 이렇게 뒤쪽으로 갔죠. 그 소년 있는 데로 갔는데 갑자기 그 아저씨들은 그냥 그 제압을 시키고 가시고 경찰은 이렇게 둘러미고 그리고 끝났는데 뒤에서 갑자기 누가 이제 이렇게 주먹을 탁 치는 거예요.
So all of a sudden, I was just standing there after all of this ruckus, and then I felt something hit me from the back.
그래서 저는 이제 그 행카를 집에다 놔두고 이제 슈퍼한테 가서 이제 전화 좀 해달라 그랬더니 슈퍼한테 얘기했더니 슈퍼가 저희 방에 오셔서 그 범인 여자분한테 전화를 했어요.
Thinking nothing of it, I went back to my apartment and told my superintendent, and the superintendent actually took my cell phone and then called one of the suspects.
그랬더니 5분 후에 가져오겠다고
And the suspect said that she would bring the bag back to me in 5 minutes.
근데 정문에서 기다리다 슈퍼가 들어가시더라고요. 그런데 제가 5분 동안 기다리질 않고 경찰 아저씨한테 가서 이렇게 툭 쳤다 하고 이렇게 가방 좀 찾아달라고 이제 거기 저는 아이디가 들어오는 줄 알고 저 찾아달라고 이제 그랬더니
I couldn't wait 5 minutes, so I went to the police came, and then I told the police what happened and that I was hit in the back.
그리고 이렇게 등을 보니까는 여기 피가 묻었었어.
So when I touched my back, there was blood spilling out of it.
저는 이제 칼에 한 방 등을 맞았고 그리고 그 피자 가게 주인 아저씨는 9번 칼을 맞고 폐에 구멍이 뚫렸어요. 그리고 아들은 한 번 맞고.
So in the aftermath, I had actually been stabbed in the back. The pizzeria owner was stabbed 9 times, and his son, the other one who was helping, was stabbed once.
그래서 저는 병원에 가서 이제 수술을 하고 그 새벽에 나왔죠. 수술.
I went to the hospital. I had my surgery, and then I was released the next morning.
예, 그래서 이제 4월 30일 날 이제 병원에 한 번만 가면은 투모 내일 하고 2번만 가면은 이제 저는 깨끗이 이제.
If I go to the hospital 2 more times, then my treatment is finally over.
그래서 다시는 이런 범죄가 일어나지 않도록 했으면 좋겠어요. 제가 아무래도 그 소년을 처음 봤을 때 이게 칼로 찔릴 것 같은 예감이 들었었는데 그게 적중한 것 같아요. 제가 그래서 앞으로는 이런 일이 안 일어날 수 있도록 좀 이렇게 노력을 많이 해야 될 것 같습니다.
I really hope nothing like this happens ever again. I just had bad feelings when I entered that situation. So, yeah, I really just hope this type of thing never happens to anyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, testimony of victims are so important. Maybe it's cathartic for them to be able to do this in front of people and strangers. Hate crimes defined by an individual is so stirring. So I'm going to tell a story before I introduce the next speaker, and you'll understand why. Hate crimes is somewhat new to America in terms of a judicial point of view, from the police point of view and the community point of view. We keep it sort of within ourselves and undercover. We don't talk that much about it. We don't have laws that have lasted for centuries on hate crimes. When the Chinese came over and built our railroads and how they were treated, many people could say that was very much indicative of a hate crime. In late 80s, there was an incident in Detroit, Michigan, where a Chinese man on the eve of his wedding went to a bar to celebrate. And during the 80s, as you know, the Japanese community was buying up a great deal of America, particularly it impacted the car industry. This young man went into a bar on the eve of his wedding, and there were two gentlemen there, a father and a son, unemployed white auto workers that mistook him for Japanese. He was Chinese. They had an argument and they took it outside. I'm going to give you the short version of this. He was then beaten over the head by a baseball bat by the father and son in Detroit, Michigan. There was a trial, there was a hearing, and they were given by the judge at the time almost a dismissive sentencing. The Asian community, particularly the Chinese community and the Taiwan community, rose up across this country. And they organized to try to open up and get a new trial. They finally succeeded, where I got involved in the late 80s, to go to Washington with a group of Chinese businessmen, and we pleaded with the Assistant Attorney General at the time, Bradford Reynolds, to open up the first trial for a hate crime in America. That trial was done on the federal courts in Detroit, and it became also an unacceptable verdict. And the judge was given, or rather the two defendants were given 25-year sentences. But they appealed it based on publicity, and it was all over the news, all over TV for this particular trial. The trial then, they got the courts to grant a venue change to Cincinnati, Ohio. And the trial occurred there again with the same evidence, but in Cincinnati. The verdict then came back. This is after the murder. Not guilty. The film, I see people nodding. The film is called Who Killed Vincent Chin? And it was the first really involvement of the federal government and the judiciary to experience a hate crime that had international implications and media attention. We're going to be hearing now from three distinct groups within the judicial and law enforcement community. And I'm going to ask the first gentleman to come up and speak, and then we're going to go to representatives from the police department and the district attorney's office. And our first speaker is a dear friend. He is the chief administrative judge of the criminal courts in Queens County, Supreme Court Judge George Grasso.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. And the main reason I wanted to be here is because obviously hate crime is a much too timely and real an issue for us. not only here in Queens County, but throughout the country, and sad to say, around the world. I noticed the flags behind me, and I think that it's, obviously we have the Israeli flag and the American flag, but it was great to see the Ukrainian flag. And I think whoever decided to do that, I thank that person, because as we look at world events and we see what's happening, we watch the news every night. And as a judge, you know, I'm restricted from engaging in political opinions, but I don't think I'm making a political opinion. I'm just stating objective fact. When what we're seeing in the Ukraine today is something that the world really hasn't seen close up since what the Nazis did in World War II under the color of state, under the color of the Russian Federation. And what is the tool that is being used to perpetrate? We see Mariupol, some of the most horrific scenes that we've seen. They say they're hunting for Nazis. Give me a break. And we see that we'd like to think when we think about the Holocaust, and I'm a true believer in the phrase never forget. We should never forget. But until what we're seeing in the Ukraine, at least speaking from my own point of view, that level of horror, especially perpetrated in Europe, seemed rather remote. It's not remote now. It's every day. And then we take it to some of the stories that we heard tonight, and very humbled to have listened to those stories. And my heart goes out to each of the individuals who spoke. So in the context of finding myself now as as Michael says, I'm actually the administrative judge of Supreme Court, criminal term, Queens County. I think I bring a bit of a unique perspective to this position because I'm actually in my 43rd year in the criminal justice system. I started back in 1979 as a police officer and did 30 years in the police department, and my first assignments as a footpost was in Queens in the 113th precinct, and rose through the ranks. I'm great to see some of my colleagues from the NYPD, former colleagues here tonight. Through 5 years as general counsel, and then 8 years as the first deputy police commissioner, and now I'm in my 13th year as a judge in New York City and back here in Queens since August. I mention that in this context because the way we fight hate in the United States is through the rule of law. The rule of law. And for the rule of law to work the way we need it to work, we need accessible courts. Available courts, accessible courts, ready to perform the awesome powers vested in us as judges to ensure that the rule of law is enforced by a rule of accountability. And I can tell you firsthand, as I stand here tonight, the courts in Queens County are open. They're going to stay open. Yes, we had a lot of difficulties in this big pandemic that we've been dealing with. When I first came back to Queens Supreme Court, when I came to Queens Supreme Court in the summer of 2021, we had a real problem with trials. We had gone periods of time where we would do maybe 1 or 2 trials a month, and we had to turn that around. And it was nobody's fault. It was the pandemic's fault. We had 6 feet social distancing. We had all kinds of rules that we had to put in place. It was very hard to bring juries and seat juries. We had to really be creative and reconfigure our courts, and I was able to play a significant role in that. We had to think out of the box to get our courts open. But we've done that, and I'm glad to tell you tonight that we're in a position that it's not unusual that we can have 10 jury trials going a day in Queens Supreme Court. We're going to keep that, and we're going to build on that. And we're going to work with all of the parties. Obviously, the police department investigates the cases, the district attorneys to prosecute the cases, the defense bar, everybody. And the thing in this country, and we can never forget this, and I say this as a judge, everyone in the United States in our system is innocent until proven guilty. That's what I mean by a system of accountability. What we have to do is provide a forum where these cases can go forward. And we have to take each case on its merits. And let's be frank about another aspect of what we're seeing. We clearly have a mental health crisis in this city and in this country. And we have to get serious about mental health. That doesn't mean using mental health, it's an excuse for people who are committed and proven guilty for committing horrific acts. But we have to acknowledge mental health. And we have to ensure that our leaders and our people who are federal level, city level, state level, we need to invest in mental health. We need to try and engage people prior to horrific acts of violence. And another reason I'm very happy to be here tonight is it's events like this that help us get together and combat fear. Because hate's biggest ally is fear. So we need to be rational. We need to stick together. We can't give in to fear. And we need to always recognize that for all the problems, thank God we live in the United States of America where the rule of law prevails. So on that note, it's great to be here tonight, and thank you for inviting me.
Right, now, before the questions and answers, really the last part of the program is we get to hear, as Judge Grasso mentioned, from the District Attorney's Office and the Police Department, NYPD. We have with us tonight Deputy Inspector Andrew Arias, who's the head of the Hate Crimes Task Force, and Michael Bravner, who's the chief of the Hate Crimes Bureau of the Queens District Attorney's Office. My understanding is you two have coordinated speaking however it works best for you. NYPD first, okay.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, for coordinating such a thoughtful evening, and thank you to the speakers that have spoken this evening and to all those that are in attendance for your time and the energy and your thoughtfulness and your willingness to listen. And particularly to those victims of crimes. You are the reason that we, as investigators of the Hate Crimes Task Force, stand here today. I spent the vast majority of my career in Manhattan detectives in almost every rank, and working my way up from a detective squad commander up to the person who oversaw all detective operations, including homicides. Crime has always been a passion. My heart has always gone out to those victims. And as somebody who was victimized as a young man of a robbery, I think about that. And every time I'm standing at the intersection of 78th Street and Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, I remember having been robbed. But fortunately, as I walk north, or I walk south, or I walk east, or I walk west, I think a little bit less of that crime. Unfortunately, with hate crimes, one lives in the skin on a daily basis. And one's identity is there, walking out of the door into the street, and it's something that one cannot forget. And that's what I'm learning in my short tenure thus far in the Hate Crime Task Force, that the victims of these most heinous acts require and deserve the attention, the thoughtfulness, and the additional investigative steps to solve the cases. As has been discussed this evening, hate crimes continue to rise. Hate crimes against all people from the LGBTQIA+ community, people in our Black community, people in our Jewish community, people in our Asian community, those people in various ethnic communities. Anti-religion crimes continue. That being said, we see some progress. And that progress is in our willingness as a task force to work with our partners and to be willing to take cases and explore them as possible bias incidents and possible hate crimes. It is not enough for us to write off from the beginning phase of a triaged case that it's not a hate crime. As was brought forth in the discussion, in its current iteration, and at the direction from the Chief of Detectives to me, we are exploring all crimes through the prosecution to try to ascertain whether they were in fact hate crimes. So, it's not enough on face value to see a crime. And I could discuss some that are currently in the media, but they're still actively being investigated or prosecuted, so I have to be very, very careful. But it's important to say that it's not enough to write it off in the beginning. One needs to identify who the perpetrator is and understand what that perpetrator's mental state may have been, what their social media says, what prior interactions may have occurred, what unsealed arrests say, and what actions they took in the past that we have access to. Because is there a pattern of hate? Is there a level of recidivism? Is there a mental health crisis? All of these layers of the onion require exploration from us in our investigations. To give you an idea of our task force, we are 24 people in every rank, from deputy inspector myself down to detective. We have 2 partners from our state police that are part of the state police's hate crime task force that work with us in conjunction and are co-located so that if a crime comes in through their hotline, it comes to us and we work hand in hand in conjunction with one another. We have prosecutorial partners like ADA Michael Brovner, who's here with us tonight, and we have those partners in every borough. We are fortunate enough to have community partners and non-governmental organizations, members of the community who are willing to stand arm in arm with us and help disseminate a message of calm and our willingness to investigate. And I realize we have members here this evening of the Asian American Bar Association, the Asian American Federation, JRCC, Community Security Initiative, and more than that. And we work to maintain connections with them and disseminate messages to them that they can let their communities and constituents know that we continue to investigate. And I'll give you, for instance, there was a crime last Wednesday in Manhattan. A supporter of Israel was on his way home, and he was victimized. And it made social media. And it made social media in such a way that the community was concerned, and as anybody with a conscience would be. And we were able to speak with our stakeholders and our partners at the various non-governmental organizations and let them know, A, we are investigating, B, we are cultivating a person of interest, and C, we are on that person's tail to try to apprehend them. And the partnership of non-governmental organizations and community groups is the foundation of us solving crimes and bringing greater calm. This evening I've brought with me, and I'd like to acknowledge Detective Calvin Lee. Calvin Lee is here, and he is our analyst who oversees and quantifies our hate crimes on a daily basis. The numbers remain fluid because as investigations progress, we find out that crimes may be a hate crime, crimes may be a possible bias incident, crimes may not be a hate crime, or crimes may not be a bias incident. And then we have a 5th category, and it's our moral conscience. If we see something that has come across our desk that we wish to explore, we take that case right now. And we take that case because it's conscionable and it's the right thing to do. And we investigate that crime to a point where we determine if it fits into one of those 4 categories, and if it doesn't, we may maintain it and continue to investigate it, or hand it to the relevant detective in the relevant jurisdiction that may be better suited to it. He's here with us, as is Lieutenant Robert Delaney. Lieutenant Delaney oversees the actual investigative processes on a daily basis that our detectives are doing. He ensures that the investigative steps are being taken and that there's proper oversight to ensure the checks and balances necessary to act within the guidelines and boundaries of the law and take the necessary investigative steps to do our best to solve the crimes. Additionally, I see in the back, and I'd like to note that members of the NYPD Shamram Society are here. They are a fraternal group of Jewish officers that represent those officers in the NYPD, and they've chosen tonight to come on their own time, voluntarily, to listen. They bring, like our Asian American Hate Crimes Task Force, cultural understanding, willingness to work, and volunteerism to assist us in solving our crimes. I cannot stress enough the partnership of these volunteer groups. The Asian Hate Crime Task Force, as members of the Shamram Society also, are willing to participate in the legal process with us, in the investigative process, to bring translation in cases that may need it, or to bring their expertise in administering photo arrays under the blinded procedures that we're required to abide by, so that victims can speak to a detective who has cultural understanding, maybe the same language skill, and they're blinded from the cases to be able to show the photo arrays necessary to bring some closure to build probable cause on our cases. I'm very grateful for their support and their willingness to join us tonight. Lastly, I'll part with this. We want to accept cases. If anybody knows anyone who's been the victim of a crime, it's a call to action. We're asking to hear from those. 911, 311, Twitter at NYPD Hate Crimes, via email. We need to know about these crimes. We need to know anecdotes. We are not afraid to explore those anecdotal incidents to ascertain if, in fact, a crime was committed. At this point, we really believe that partnership with the community and partnership at the grassroots level is what's going to assist in sort of hitting a synergy where all New Yorkers can feel more safe and we can see a diminishment in hate crimes. I thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I look forward to hearing from ADA Brovner. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you, and thank you, Mayor and Avi, for having me here. It's really important. My name is Michael Brovner. I'm the chief of the Hate Crimes Task Force. The Hate Crimes Bureau at the Queens District Attorney's Office under Melinda Katz. With me is one of my assistants, Serena Wen, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys about this. I've been at the DA's office since 1995, and all except for about 3 or 4 years, I've dedicated myself to prosecuting hate crimes. And the reason why is because these crimes are special. Inspector Arias kind of referenced that. When someone's a victim of one of these hate crimes, as you've heard from the people that have spoken about it, it's something that stays with them for a long time because it goes to their very essence. When someone's the victim of a robbery, like Inspector Arias talked about, he can just avoid that little corner and not go back there. But when someone's a victim of a hate crime, they can't stop being who they are. They can't change where they're from. They can't change their religion. They can't change who they love. And because of that, it makes them always feel vulnerable. And that can lead to psychological problems, and it's much harder for them to recover when they're a victim of a crime like that. But besides the actual person that's victim of a hate crime, you also have all the other people that are victims of that same crime, even though they weren't there. You have the people from that victim's community, other people that are similarly situated that now feel like they could be next. that they can't feel safe when they go out. And also other people, not from necessarily that particular community, but other people that also feel that they could be next, that they could be targeted because of who they are, because of the color of their skin, because of their religion. And no one in society wants to live in a world where you're victimized because of who you are. There's another reason why it's important to go after these type of cases. Because these cases are statement crimes. They get a lot of media attention. You don't want a situation where you have copycats, where someone says, oh, this person got attention for attacking this particular group, so I'm going to do that too. And you also don't want the reverse, where someone says, I'm going to go defend my community by attacking someone from that group. So that's why it's important that we fight these cases, and that's why DA Katz created the Hate Crimes Bureau. What I want to do now is talk a little bit about the actual statute, so you understand why certain cases that might appear to be a hate crime can't get prosecuted as a hate crime, and why some cases are prosecuted as a hate crime. Under New York law, for it to be a hate crime, the person has to, the defendant, the perpetrator, has to either intentionally select the person or intentionally commit the act or acts constituting the offense in whole or in substantial part because of a belief or perception regarding the race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender, gender identity or expression, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or sexual orientation of the victim. So as you can see, if you step back from that, that covers a lot of ground. But the person has to commit the crime in whole or substantial part because of one of those classes. And it applies to everyone. It doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter what your national origin is, what your religion is, it applies to everyone. Someone who's white can be attacked and be a victim of a hate crime. Someone who's black can be attacked and be a victim of a hate crime. Someone who's Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Jewish, anyone can be attacked for whatever reason. As if they're being attacked because of that protected trait, that's what makes it a hate crime. And it doesn't apply to every single crime, but it applies to most crimes. So you have to have an underlying offense. It can't just be someone said something offensive to me, it's a hate crime. It's not. It has to apply to a particular property crime, act of violence, or a sex crime. And what it does is it elevates the crime. So in other words, if someone commits a simple assault in the third degree, speaking of crime, if someone commits the assault in the third degree and a misdemeanor, what that would do, if it's a hate crime, it elevates it to an E-level felony. And if it's, let's say, a C felony, it elevates it to a B felony. So basically it raises the minimum and in most cases raises the maximum sentence. The statute also makes clear that even if you can prove the victim, the defendant's, or both the victim and defendant's class, that's insufficient. So just because someone who's, let's say, white attacks someone who's black, that doesn't make it a hate crime. You have to prove that they committed the act in whole or substantial part because of that reason. There's two other statutes I want to talk about because they're kind of lumped in with hate crimes. One is aggravated harassment in the first degree. This statute is an E felony, and it basically captures historical symbols of hate crimes throughout our country, as well as recidivists. So for one of these cases, if the defendant intentionally, with the intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm another person because of belief or perception regarding one of those classes, causes more than $50 worth of damage to a religious institution, was previously convicted of aggravated harassment within the prior 10 years, etches or paints or draws a Nazi swastika, burns a cross in public, or etches, paints, draws, or displays a noose. That's an E felony. And what's special about that, for certain of these charges, without that statute, it might not even be a crime. The other one that comes up frequently is aggravated harassment in the second degree. So that's, again, with the intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm another person. because of a belief or perception regarding one of those classes, attempts to, threatens to, or otherwise does strike, shove, kick, or otherwise subjects another person to physical contact, that's now a misdemeanor. Without the hate crime element, it would just be a violation, which isn't even a crime. So this allows us to prosecute cases where someone spits at another person because of who they are. Now, the big difference in hate crimes versus other crimes that we deal with is we have to prove the motive element. We have to prove why the defendant committed this charge, this crime. And as Inspector Arias pointed out, that's not always so simple. Sometimes you get obvious things because they're saying the offensive words or the slurs during the course of the commission of the crime. Sometimes it's because of the hard work of the detectives when they talk to the defendant afterwards and they can get a full confession. Other times it's more circumstantial. So we look to things like the location. Did the victim get attacked right outside a place of worship? That would be something we look at. Outside of right after a gay pride parade, something like that. We look at that. We look at the defendant's history, as we heard about. What have they done in the past? Have they attacked other people of the same group, same class? We also look at tattoos, graffiti, social media, writings that they may have done. We also can use expert testimony to explain the particular words they're saying, some of the language that they're using. And we use a lot of tools in order to get this, including search warrants. As Representative Meng mentioned, the search warrant we executed on that defendant's phone to get the text messages that he had sent after he attacked the woman in front of the Flushing bakery. Another issue that we have, and then most importantly, we have to prove the underlying crime. If we can prove that the person's a bigot, but we can't prove the crime, it's irrelevant. So we have to prove both the crime as well as the prejudice. There's several challenges with going after these hate crimes, and one is the language barrier. A lot of times, the victims of these crimes are hesitant to come forward. And fortunately, the PD, the New York City Police Department, has been active in trying to address that. They have the Asian Hate Crime Task Force, and we at the Queen's DA's office have multiple district attorneys and prosecutors and assistants that speak multiple languages. So that shouldn't stop someone from coming forward. There's also been in certain communities a culture of distrust, that they don't trust the police department. But fortunately, we have the Hate Crimes Task Force, which is really excellent. It's one of the things that makes what's kind of a challenging job for myself and Serena easier, because we have such excellent detectives working on this. There's also in certain communities a fear of deportation. Well, first of all, NYPD, as well as our offices, doesn't care about that. We don't ask where you're from, whether you're here legally. That's not something we ask. We're not allowed to, and it's irrelevant. Furthermore, if it becomes an issue, we can always look to providing protection, including U visas, to make sure no one's going to get deported, and they can get benefits because of that, if they're cooperating. So those are some of the things that we do. And when you're looking at one of these cases, a lot of times there's a pressure to quickly declare something a hate crime and charge it as such. Well, we at the DA's office are really careful about that, because we don't want to falsely accuse someone of committing a hate crime if we can't prove it. And once someone gets arrested, we only have 24 hours to arraign them. And as you heard, some of the things that we look at in order to proving this, a lot of times we're not going to get that within 24 hours. So we have to be cognizant of the limitations that we're under. We don't want to force a victim of a crime to try to exaggerate or lie and say that something is a hate crime when it's not. We don't want to be in a situation where we're charging hate crimes when we don't have the evidence to support it, because it will be bad. If we're always accusing someone of a hate crime and then we ask for bail and the judges are like, you always say it's a hate crime when it's not a hate crime, They're not going to consider bail when we have real hate crimes. So we have to be cognizant of that. We have to look at it. And even if we're not able to charge it right at the beginning, we continue doing the investigations. The detectives continue investigating. We execute search warrants. We do subpoenas. And then we might have the evidence we need. And then we can charge it as it should be charged, as a hate crime, or not, if the evidence doesn't support it. And even if we can't charge it as a hate crime, we can still prosecute the underlying offense. And some of those offenses are going to be very harsh, and we can bring out the facts before that and get a stronger sentence if that's what's appropriate. Let me just talk a little bit about my bureau. As I mentioned, it's a relatively new bureau. When DA Katz came in, she created one of the first standalone hate crime bureaus in the country. There are not many of us out there. And we focus exclusively on investigating and prosecuting these cases. We look for alternative sentencing options when that's appropriate, and we do community outreach. And I'm happy to speak to whoever wants to hear from me. And we're a 24-hour operation. So if there is a hate crime, we work with the Hate Crimes Task Force 24/7. We get calls all the time. Sometimes I'm more happy to get their calls than others, but I'm always there, and we're always happy to help them. And we have a hotline number at the DA's office, which is 718-286-7010. So if you're a victim of a hate crime, you can call us, call 911 first so that the police can respond quickly and get the evidence as fast as possible. But you can also reach out to us at 718-286-7010. Thanks so much for your time.
I want to thank the representatives from both the DA's office and the NYPD. We're going to conclude shortly, but I want to remind those that are here that we do have a reception downstairs where we will serve a reasonable dinner. It's not extensive. It's not going to be a 10-course, but we have refreshments and food that we'd like you to join us and to continue the discussion. So why do we do this? Well, how do we, when we leave here, where do we go? That's really what I want to talk about and conclude. We did this because the young people in the audience, I'm hoping that they will join myself, Queens Jewish Community Council, JCRC, Stand With Us, and work with us, and we will help fund that, to work with you to train yourselves and your fellow people to go into the schools. We have to educate those students about hate and the differences. And the other thing for the seniors and the adults, you have to come forward. You have to speak up. You have to be able to know that there are people out there that will be with you, that will stand with you. And we in the Queens Jewish Community Council, we will stand with any group, any time, any place to defend your right to be who you are, whether it be a religious incident at a religious facility or an ethnic event because you're an Asian, Black, Latino, whatever it may be. Recently, we were at press conferences at the Sikh community in Richmond Hill. There are a number of incidents there, literally on the same block on Lefferts Avenue. It's two different groups, two different individuals, but the same corner. Police department was extraordinarily quick in intercepting some of those individuals. But we as individuals, we look to our neighbors, and if we hear something, we have to speak out. And I think if there's a lesson today, you're not alone. You're not alone. No matter who you are and where you came from, you're not alone. We're here and we speak. But those gentlemen in the police department and the people in the DA's office, they're there every day to support you. And believe me, when you come before a judge in the judicial system, they will give you every opportunity to tell your story and to listen to what you're saying. And there will be an end to your individual incident. And I think, you know, Joey reminded me of something, and I saw his scar that's on his face from that box cutter. The scars that are visible are sometimes healed quickly, and that you don't remember them. But inside, the scars that are inside you from a hate crime and an incident are there for your entire life. As the deputy inspector mentioned about just being robbed, it's there. Having your wallet stolen versus having your face slashed. The scars are inside as well as outside. We'd like to take a few minutes for questions. Mayor has a microphone if somebody wants to raise their hand and direct it at particularly either someone from the police department or the DA's office or anyone that had spoken, we'd welcome that. Just a few. Anyone? If there's not, then I guess everyone's a little hungry. But if not, I thank the Free Synagogue of Flushing and Cantor Brava and everyone for allowing us to come in here and share their stories. There's one question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just have one question.
Introduce yourself and stand up, please.
I'm Judy Rosen, a Vice President of the Queens Jewish Community Council. And what upsets me is that everybody's working hard trying to complete the task. But once the task is completed and you find the person who is the perpetrator, then what are you going to do with him? Because of these laws in New York State that haven't been changed yet with the no bail law and so forth, what is one to do with the criminal?
You can pass the microphone. Go ahead.
I mean, I wanted to say, yeah, really bothersome.
Thanks. There has been some changes with regards to the bail, specifically with regards to hate crimes. So, for example, assault in the third degree as a hate crime is an e-felony. It's one of the few e-felonies, I think there's one other, that you can potentially get bail with. And then with regards to the sentencing, we looked at a lot of factors to determine what the appropriate sentence is. Sometimes we'll find out that the defendant does have significant mental health issues, and then a lot of times we'll look to put that person in mental health court where they'll be monitored for a year or two by the court. If they mess up, they will be sentenced on the felony. If they don't, usually they can get 3 years probation if they've been monitored for 2 years or a year, depending upon the defendant and the situation. So that's one of the things. I'm sorry. Right. So it is a concern when you have someone that's not so much the person that commits multiple hate crimes. Usually the concern I have is that you see someone who's committed a couple prior crimes, gotten out, and then commits a hate crime. And now they have like 2 or 3 cases, and now they have the hate crime because it wasn't taken, it wasn't addressed with the earlier crimes. So it is a concern. But once we get it as a hate crime, we have some more flexibility because of the nature of the charges and the fact that it gets elevated. So it is something that we're concerned about, and when we can, we ask for bail and we make sure that we can keep the person in, and we work really hard to quickly get that case into the grand jury.
There anything on the left side? Someone right there, Mayor, next to you.
One second. Okay. Yeah, I just want to real quickly say a few mentions of some of the people who are with us before I pass on to actually the questioner is one of the people I want to mention. But first, let me point out that Assemblyman Hevesi's office, Michael Carlier, is here. Richard, Lisa, Maria, and Barry from the Community Emergency Response Team of New York City are here. Howard Pollack is the Director of Community Affairs for the JCRC. And the fellow with the question is the Ben Golub, who is the incoming new president of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. So, Mr. Golub.
Thank you. And it's been very, very enlightening discussions we've had so far. My question is, we see seemingly random incidents all about of these different hate crimes, different perpetrators, different ethnicities, which are the victims. In what has been going on, have we detected any organized elements to the hate crimes? Are there hate groups out there that are these more than just random incidents of people who, you know, have bad attitudes and manifest itself? But do we sense that there's any organized hate in New York City?
Inspector, if you want to.
It's a very thoughtful question. So, we as a hate crimes task force investigate individual crimes and individual incidents of hate. Some of those, as described like in Richmond Hill, in the 102 precinct, can be considered patterns if they've occurred in the same location, the same victimology, the same perpetrator. That could be considered a pattern. And just to give a very small semantical correction, the crimes that occurred, a cluster of 3 in the 102 precinct within a short period of time, were committed by 2 perpetrators working in tandem with one another. So it was one pattern with 2 arrests on all the incidents. In those instances, obviously, we're identifying patterns, and this year we have approximately 15 patterns of crimes based on the criteria that I'm outlining. But when one's looking at a macro issue of whether there are hate groups and whatnot, we're very, very lucky. We're lucky in many, many regards because we have our partners in the federal government, we have our partners in the NYPD's Intelligence Bureau, and we have our non-governmental partners such as the Anti-Defamation League that are lending analysts and investigative analysts to this discussion. And while we may see across various areas better organized groups that are perpetuating hate and spewing vitriolic language, we are not seeing those in the individual crimes that are occurring. When I say that we have patterns, those patterns may exist because one person has committed more than one crime. So there's a level of repeat offense, but I would say that it's not, and this is anecdotally, and this is qualitatively, it is less organized than one would think.
Thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge Eva Weiner, who's here from Governor Hochul's office, and David Aronoff, who is here representing the UJA, and Fred Fleischer from Jewish Community Relations Council of Queens.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Fred Fleischer. I'm the Assistant Executive Director of the Queens Jewish Community Council. My question is for the inspector. You use the terminology hate and bias. In the eyes of the law, is there a difference between hate and bias?
That may be better directed to Mike Brovner, but yes, and I can give you a layman's explanation. Michael can probably provide you a more thoughtful explanation predicated upon Penal Law 48505.
So basically the way it's viewed is if there's no underlying crime, it's a biased incident. So for example, you're walking down the street, someone shouts something offensive at you, referring to your race, national origin, religion, whatnot, and doesn't touch you. That's not a crime. It's awful, but it's covered by free speech, so it's considered a biased incident. Something happened, but it doesn't rise to the level of a crime. If someone did that exact same thing, attacked you verbally, and then, let's say, punched you, or spit at you, or robbed you, then that would be a hate crime because you have the bias plus an underlying crime. So that's kind of how it plays out. Thanks.
All right. Again, we're all in this together. No matter who you are, where you came from, where you may be going, what religion you have, or what ethnicity you are, depending on where you live. We're in this thing together.
a hate crime against one is a hate crime against everybody in my eyes. As I said, I will stand with anyone in any place at any time to defend your rights to be a human being, to worship the way you want to worship, to wear the clothes you want to wear, to shop where you want to shop. And we've done that time and time again from the Jewish Community Council and others. We've all suffered, some of us over decades, and the Jewish community could probably say thousands of years. But we're all in it together here in New York City. You know, as the mayor's office has set aside funding, the police department is ramped up in terms of their acuity to this particular crime because it's happening much, much too often. And the district attorney's office to recognize the need to form a bureau to respond. And a judge in the leadership of the criminal courts who's also sensitive to understand when there is a case brought before for a trial, how to go forward. The media jumps on things and causes celeb on an incident. But it's the people in this room that have to go forward, and I challenge the young people in the back, and I hope to talk to you more downstairs, because we want to help fund and develop programs to support your efforts, because it's your generation that's going to lead the way to one day never end hate. I don't think we can ever end it. We're human. But your generation that could work together and organize better, because you now have the technical skills through social media to address these issues that we never had before. If it wasn't in the newspaper, it never happened. Today it happens because you have the technical ability to get that message out instantly. Hate crimes are captured on video on the streets almost instantly. And that's a service both from the DA's office as well as the police department. But we're here, and I will pledge money to raise that we get from the city and elsewhere. And I know the governor of the state of New York, as well as the mayor, is setting aside a great deal of funds, and the governor just announced a great deal of money set aside to prosecute and deal with hate crimes in this state. So the sensitivity of this thing has risen to a greater level, unfortunately, because the incidents have risen to a greater level. But we're there for you, and we thank everyone for coming this evening. And let's continue the dialogue and the discussion downstairs. Thank you.